Okay, so welcome everyone to the eighth episode of Creators Arena, brought to you by creators of product. We have today with us Saurabh Pareek. He's currently working with PayPal. He is responsible for building scalable platforms and experiences to deliver user delights globally. And PayPal needs no introduction. He's been part of multiple startups, even MNCs, as well as he's worked with nonprofit sector and has worked in variety of domains like payments, e-commerce, edtech, media, data privacy, and content management. And he has lots of experience in leading teams and building products, bringing great impact and challenging the status quo. And in today's session, he'll be taking us through uh, platform blocks and how do you use platforms to build better products. So thank you so much, Saurabh, for taking out time early morning in your time for doing this session. And without wasting any more time, I'll hand it over to you. To everybody, I would just request if you have any questions, please keep writing on the chat box to everyone so that at the end of the session, you can directly ask those questions to Saurabh in the order that they have come. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining and Saurabh for doing this. And over to you, sir.
Awesome. Thank you, Devakar, and thank you everyone for joining. I know it's a webinar overdose. I was discussing with Shruti also yesterday that we all have been interacting so much on video that it's not always easy, but I think it's great to have you all here. And the topic probably is not something I personally hear a lot about, or I heard a lot about when I was learning product management. So what I will try to focus on is to touch a bit of on the basics of how I interpreted it a few years back and how I feel that it is one of the fields which you will hear a lot more about in Indian startup ecosystem too. As and you have actually started hearing, even in when you read a PR or news, that how the companies are really aiming not to just solve a problem statement, but to build an ecosystem of platforms where they can scale. So quickly to start about me, I have something similar what a lot of product managers have, but something you should not have as a takeaway. I did my engineering. I had my startup, didn't work out. I was a product manager at a tech company, moved to Paytm. It's a payments company. Then moved to PayPal, again into fintech. Simultaneously was studying some of the domains which were personally of interest to me. And I will touch base on that a bit later. On as a product manager, your role is not honestly, that circle we draw, that tech business and a design, and somewhere in between you lie. It's not always that scenario. There are multiple flavors of product management that exist, and that's why when you also would start thinking about it, you'll probably find, like for me, it was public policy law and some other things. For you, it probably would be something else which you would want to learn more about. So jumping into what we would try to cover today, and we have limited time, so I'll probably be only touching on the surface of that. But if these topics become an area of interest for you, I would definitely recommend you to basically read more on it. And there are a lot of white papers on the topic. So if you are starting into product management especially, it would be a good learning resource for you to really go and read some of those resources and decide which side of product management is more appealing to you. So we'll touch base quickly on the role of PM and defining some basic rules of product management, so that when we dive into platform PM role too, they still have to follow what a PM is supposed to do. In addition to what specialization they have to really bring into, we'll discuss quickly on that. What platforms really mean, because again, it's an overused term. Let's agree on it. And if you would talk to an architect, they would have a view that this is a checklist which something has to meet if you want to call something a platform, versus how you really envision something from a product manager's lens. You need to really think on the end goal of how you envision your product line. We'll touch quickly on the roles and responsibility of you as a platform PM. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, so the 5 or 6 points we will touch on are something which you should do, but there probably can be more things depending on the domain you are in. So if you are in OTT, there might be some other things which would come into picture about, let's say, the size of content, the transmission of content, and so on, versus if you are into, let's say, mobility. We'll quickly talk on the platform first strategy, that how it can help you leverage, and at what time really you should talk about platformization, because that should not be the first thought that should come to your mind too. And a few book recommendations, because again, product management is really not a cheat sheet which you can read and you can see that now you know it. So probably learning a lot about behavioral psychology and how users think is a good way to really learn into that. And I know Devakar mentioned to have questions in the end, but if there is something pressing that you think is important, we all should discuss together. Just put it into comments, and we can try to quickly touch base on it when we are covering it too. I hope, Devakar, that's fine.
As you feel comfortable.
Okay. This is a construct which I generally start from very often, and the reason is, if you are a product manager, you know it well. In the role, one of the most important things is not just to deliver a success metrics or KPI, but really being conscious and aware. And I think as a product manager, if you really want to be a great product manager, I'm not saying you need to meditate always to be in this aware state, but you really need to be aware of the surrounding ecosystem, what the ecosystem is doing, what factors, external factors are really impacting. It can be legal, it can be privacy, it can be how other companies are progressing, and how the decisions you are making are really going to impact you in long term. And it's totally fine to really fail and getting up and really doing it again. But the important factor in all the discussions on why you need to talk to customers, why you need to have data in hand and understand the impact of what you're doing, that comes into picture, so that you are really aware of that. So as a fundamental principle, irrespective of you're thinking of a feature PM, you're thinking of a platform PM or something else, try to find the attributes which would help you achieve that consciousness level. And you can basically say that any decision you're making, you were aware of the factors that really impacted the success and failure, because that ambiguity is going to be a challenging space for you in. And the more ambiguous you are, every next action you would be really taking is going to be ambiguous too. So starting with the role of PM, the first principle, in my opinion, which is always something you should follow, is being humble and being truly the representative of customer. There are people who would say that you need to have stronger opinions. It's great to have opinions, but I think what being humble and really inclined to learn from customers help you is you become a true voice and representatives, because that's really where you need to solve the problems. You would always hear examples of, and again, Steve Jobs probably is the best product manager, one of the best product managers we have had. But don't get inclined onto what really comes out on screen when you see that, oh, he's a rude guy. But one of the things you would learn if you would read his biography is how customer focused he was. And Apple probably has one of the biggest customer research teams, which most of the companies mention, but Apple does not really end up mentioning a lot about. And being customer focused for yourself as a product manager, irrespective of the stage you are in, whether you are just starting your career or you are at a senior role, being inclined to knowing from customer what they want and learning the skill to decrypt that and deciding what your roadmap should be would probably be the biggest strength you would be able to learn. Being aware of market, competitors, and factors that impact. And that factor is often missed, because I know I was reading, I think, Devakar, you also tweeted regarding this, that how execution focused PM roles sometimes can become. And that is where also the fundamental challenge of it comes. You need to find that balance, that even if your role is very execution focused, how you can bring that strategic mindset into your role, whether it's about just knowing what market is doing, what regulation the government is changing that can impact your business or your competitor's business. And that information might not be of immediate use, but actually will give you a lot of perspective on what you should be really doing ahead. Uh, and even if you are, let's say, deciding to move to another company, you're moving or switching industries, that knowledge would probably be the base which will help you move further into that. Ideas, collaboration, I think that would always remain the same, but being a PM, it's a lonely job in some senses. The reason I call it a lonely job is because it's a very, very powerful role, but sometimes you would not have authority or ability to make independent decisions in a lot of senses. And that incline would mean that you would have to collaborate with a lot of your key stakeholders. You should be able to bring those people together for them to come to a consensus and eventually deliver what you were aiming to deliver. And that would not happen without your skills of bringing those people together, because eventually you're not really solving a machine problem, you're solving a human problem. And all those teams really are the ones who are going to help you achieve that. And last but not definitely the least important one is specifically that don't think if you have defined a product goal in the beginning, as a PM, you would have to manage the narratives of how other people really perceive that versus what your product is supposed to do. And that is a trap you or PMs probably would have felt a lot of times into, because defining a product is sounds easy but can be a very complex thing. So one of the exercises you should think of is how companies who are successful right now really defines their goal or role of their product into the market. And you would find that their role or definition of product really evolves over a period of time to make it sound very simple of what their core mission or purpose is. And that takes time to be able to explain that very simply. It would need a lot of effort from your side to really talk to all these things, because you would talk to agency, marketing, or operations or legal. They all are perceiving the work you are doing or they are contributing to in different ways, because the KPIs are different. The way they would measure that is very different. But it is your job that how the customer would really see that when they are going to use it. Because if that messaging, if the definition of product is something you have not been able to define well, the consumer would also not really understand what truly is the value you are really giving to them. They might still use it because there is a need, and the underlying need they are also not sure how to really solve for it. But eventually there would be competitors who would come in, who would be able to communicate that much better and much more effective, and your product would become obsolete at that point of time. So as you think about your journey, uh, both as a starting PM or an experienced PM, invest a lot of time into that definition, because even those few lines or writing those few pages on your product, how you interpret, writing a PR for your product, which is a common construct which Amazon's product requirement documents really follow, is a really good exercise. So even if your company follows a different structure of writing requirements, try to envision how your product would be when you launch it to market. How would you write a PR of that, how the news of that would be published, and that can help you really define that product vision well. And irrespective of feature PM or platform PM, this is one of the trap a lot of us really fall into. Building features is great, and a lot of companies often become feature factory either because of me too, or because they are not clear of what they are really expecting from each of those features. And it's not like the remotes, much more cleaner, much more lean ones we have right now are bad. They are still doing the job the remote which they show here is doing. But the problem is someone thought that, oh, because it's in functionality, let's put it out there because there would be someone who would want to use it. That someone is what you need to really bring the understanding. Because what a customer would say that I want to, let's say, have a button regarding this, it does not mean you need to really always bring it. And that's where your role would come into picture, to be very selective and to really know where to say no versus where to interpret the customer requirement in something that has to translate into a feature on your product, on your website, on your app, or anywhere else. And just a quick call out that when we discuss about platform product management too, the role would vary just like any other PM role based on the scale at which your company operates, the industry it operates, and the level at which you are in. Because the focus of management would be different in a fast growing startup where you if you are over there versus a multinational corporation where you're there. The goals can be very different, and your role would completely be dictated by a lot of those factors. So some of these points we are going to discuss may or may not apply to those roles, but you can say that more or less 80% of those fundamental principles will remain the same. And whatever the external factors of geography you are located in, the company business, what it is in, whether it's a B2B, whether it's a SaaS company or something else, those factors would just add that 20% delta into it. Okay. Feel free to keep commenting any questions, thoughts, inputs, or just your viewpoints you would have, so that we are sure that there is nothing too wrong I'm talking. Okay. Moving to the platform and its core principles, and we'll probably start by quickly defining what platform really means. And it's a long debate. All of you who are into product management, you would have heard about the debate on platform versus services, what you should really call platform services. I would just say that abstract yourself out of it. You should, as a PM, probably focus on what your end goal is. If your goal is to build services, build those APIs which can really power something and not think beyond that, that's fine. Probably that is the need of the market and need of your company at that point of time. But in your mind, you should have the end goal, that what level the product can truly reach when it sees the scale, when it sees the diversity of customers it really is looking towards. So platform is simply technologies that are used based on the need, and it is basically blocks of technologies and not really a monolith which is supposed to do something. So think of a factory line. A production line of cars is not a single unit. It can be deassembled. Each unit has its role to play, and it might not have significance on its own. So if you only put one machine of that production line, it still has value, it still has the cost, it still has the utility it can bring. But the real power really comes into when you know the sequencing of products to really organize into, and which all of these blocks need to really come together to deliver that customer problem you are trying to solve. And that's why these ecosystems, when you think about platform, they need to drive economic value upstream. And a lot of times it's external, especially because a lot of platforms would engage with external developers, they would engage with external companies, they would be integrating with them, or they might be creating an open platform ecosystem where they don't even need to know who is really running their applications. So think about Google Cloud or Salesforce. They don't specifically, their product team does not need to know which client has been signed up recently, because they might have thousands and hundreds of thousands of clients. So the abstraction as a product manager, you need to know till what level you need to be aware, versus you really automate, you really uh, make it a do it yourself kind of ecosystem, where how you are deploying, building, monitoring does not affect the other people directly, but you are able to manage, let's say, those releases, then how the infrastructure plays a role. And we use a lot of products, so you can actually relate to those products which are truly platforms, whether you talk about your operating systems, whether you talk about how AWS or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud now works, how payment platforms like PayPal or MasterCard or Visa work. And you are using them underlying at a lot of places. Like when you are making a payment on Uber, you really don't know who is truly processing the payment. What you as a user care about is you added your financial instrument, whether a credit card, debit card, bank. You want that payment to process with high success rate, with least amount of time taken, and the process being as simple as that. Now, whether that would mean a good interface, whether that would mean ability to scan a card or anything else, the end customer probably would not be always concerned about these platforms. And when you think about any of these examples, you would realize that they have more than one party which is engaging into making them truly successful. So when you think about content platforms like YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, they have created that ecosystem where there are blocks which help a content creator create content and upload to the system. They have the whole infrastructure layer which manages all those complexities of, let's say, what Kodak to use, how to host that content, how to deliver that content, how to meet the, let's say, data localization requirements in that specific country, and how to deliver that to the user who is using it on multiple variety of devices. Because let's say you're using Instagram, there are users who are using Instagram on great devices with good hardware, and there are users who are using it on $100 device too. And you need to ensure that your product is able to really work across all the form factors you have, to ensure that your creators and your consumers both are really satisfied into it. Same for marketplaces. eBay would allow you as a casual seller to sell a product, and someone else would really end up buying your product. or something like Shopify, which does not sell something itself, but it just provides an ecosystem for sellers to come, create their website, manage their inventory, process their orders, do the reconciliation. But basically, as a user, you would never know it was Shopify which was powering all of that. So I think in summary, when you think about any of the products, if you would go and try to understand how that ecosystem works, you would be able to identify if they behave like a platform, what are the different platforms which make them successful, and why a lot of companies are really moving towards platform first strategy. And you would hear, especially companies like Amazon or Microsoft or PayPal or Apple talking about building this platform ecosystem, because that is where you can cater to the scale you are at. If you're dealing into 300 million, 1 billion, 2 billion user base, you cannot create features which are ad hoc and which would specifically cater to a temporary need, because the need for features would keep changing. And that is where creating that ecosystem really helps, because then you can keep reiterating on those features very fast without really changing the underlying source into that. To simply put, and again, don't relate platforms to just technology things. Even if you are a non-technical product manager, you should just learn the construct and logical part of it, but not worry about it being engineering heavy or not engineering heavy. There are great product managers who were not engineers, and they have built awesome platforms in that sense. So think of it like Lego blocks. The individual block of Lego is not useless. It still has value, but you really cannot do much with it alone. And how you combine them, how to bring them together is the art which will dictate whether you are able to make a house or you are able to make a plane. But if you really don't know how to, and what sequence and what order and what blocks you need to bring together, you might just end up scrambling them, but nothing meaningful would come out. That would not mean that those blocks are useless in itself. To go into more technicality, think of your company, think of some company you have researched for, and what underlying things really make them great. So take example of Google, Amazon, PayPal, any company you understand well. They would have something to authenticate. That is where you log in, where they manage your credentials. They have to be secure regarding that, and all the complexity comes over there. How they search, whether they search your transactions, whether you are able to search your items you want to order, the underlying services probably at a lot of times are going to be same. How they manage your subscriptions, there would be a lot of events being fired. And when you think of events, think of any event in customer lifecycle, how those events are being managed, how the ranking and sorting of products or features you see is dictated. That can be dictated by rules, that can be dictated by machine learning models, how the supply chain is happening, and so many other things, right? So think of this like how any of the microservices architecture would be, where you have blocks of pieces and they do some job. So think of search as a service or search API. If you are an e-commerce company, you would not build search 3 times because you are using it in 3 different flavors. Sometimes you would be as a user searching your past orders and you just want to type. So think of Amazon, if you go over there and search. Think of PayPal when you go in your past transactions and search. Versus if you are on, let's say, product page and you want to search the product you want to buy and you enter a keyword, it probably can be same services. It might be using different flavors and different modeling, but just understand the construct that when you think of these platform level services or those platform blocks, they are built fundamentally not related to one feature. They are built so that product A, product B, product C can pick and choose that I need to use authentication, search, and events. How can I really do that if I'm launching a t-shirt marketplace? Versus if I'm launching an arts marketplace, what does really change? I need an artist API because I need to onboard artists. Versus in case of t-shirt, I need to onboard sellers. So understanding that construct would make you understand that platforms are not about the how technically you have built, but it is still about just envisioning what scale you are foreseeing, building for the present, but actually building for the future. So, and that's why we would come to a point later in the discussion that you should not start thinking about, oh, I need to platformize because every company wants to be a platform. You should still be able to abstract that off and say that at this point of time, I need to build and test the market. And once I feel convinced that it is a problem worth solving long term, you would invest into making it a platform block. And platform will still focus into velocity. Your goal is to build something agnostic, which can help your multiple of customer facing PMs scale better. You would sometimes not be directly talking to the end customer, but then your customers are the developers in your company. It can be developers in the other company you are working with. It can be the ecosystem in general, where you don't know, you don't need a contract to work on your APIs, but they can just go and consume those. And also being customer focused. So a lot of times we perceive that, oh, because it's a platform, we can just solve it magically because we know what developers want. That's honestly not true. You still need to interview your end customer. You still need to interview or understand your intermediate customers, who can be developers, who can be customer facing product managers. But the information you probably would get at sometimes is slightly processed, and that's where your art of defining the product roadmap really comes into picture. That what are the commonalities into that, and we'll touch base on that, and how do you really build those blocks in a sequential way. I'll quickly touch on what Sahana mentioned about our platform products built with the mindset of making product as service. It can be and it may not be. I would say that as a service really plays a role when you want to scale. If it's a company which is not planning to outsource it, it's fine. But when you think of as a service of anything like catalog as a service or search as a service or anything as a service, the service can just cater to internal clients. So yes, when you think about it, your goal should be, it should be available as a service to any of the teams who are working into. So think of, you're working into a multinational company, they operate into different businesses. Can that block be a service which can be used internally only in your company? But maybe at a later point of time, you decide that you just want to open it up, and even third-party companies can use that product. Shruti is mentioning regarding basic tech topics one should make themselves comfortable with. I'll probably touch base on it a bit later, specifically because I don't want to overstress on the engineering part of it. I want us to focus more on the problem solving part of it, and whether you are an engineer or not engineer is going to give you advantage in some senses. So even if you're not an engineer but a liberal arts graduate, you would still bring a lot of other values in that mindset. Now, in terms of principles, by the way, how many of you are non-engineers? If you don't mind, just comment so that I understand and I'm able to address how you would be probably thinking about the topic too. But platforms have to follow some principles, which in ideal world you would want them to have, that they are multi-tenant, where you are not dependent on building for one tenant. They are interoperable. They can exist in autonomy, and don't need to be always totally dependent on some other block. You always need to solve for great developer experience because they are your clients, and the more efficient you can make those developers, the better the adaptability of your platform would be. So think of when you want to integrate some payments options into your checkout flow, you would want to use the APIs of a product which are clean, the API documentation is nice, and the integration is simpler. Of course, when you're choosing, let's say, a payment gateway, you would look at the pricing, you would look at, uh, you know, the success rate of it, but you would also look at the developer experience KPIs, which are, let's say, anything ranging from the cost of integration to the complexity of the integration to the cost of maintenance, let's say the size of the SDK you are integrating, and so on. Governance in any platform scenario, or mostly in any product line scenario, has to be very fundamental to this. We'll touch base a bit more on that. That governance is not just about having ACL of, or let's say, access control list, but it is also about what governance mindset you are defining, that this data point is a sensitive data point. So should this be a private data point which cannot be shared, or let's say downloaded, or it is masked or encrypted? So that level of governance also you need to be aware when you are building those things, because you would actually enter so many uncharted territories. And that's where the point of developer ethics also comes in. And in my opinion, it's probably one of the least spoken topics in product management as well as tech, that what is your role on the ethical grounds when you're building anything. Because let's face one thing, when you build something which scales, you are not just changing how users think and use things, but you are in some senses sometimes also intruding in privacy. You are changing their behaviors for bad too. And being consciously aware of that, I would say, as a PM, is your role and is your responsibility, because you don't want to build things where you are using bad means to make products addictive, and that should not be a goal. And enough products which become addictive and which are actually exploiting the data they get from you. You need to know that how do you remove your biases when you're building. And platforms can inherit a lot of biases of the product manager, of the company's leadership, of the developers who are building it. And you don't want platforms or any feature to reflect your bias when you are building those things. I know it is not a technical topic, but being ethically aware about what you're building and the impact of it is really going to help. And that is where I mentioned that for me, public policy and law became an important area. That as a product manager, am I aware what are the data regulations which are coming into multiple countries? Some of you would be aware about GDPR in Europe, which is probably one of the most exhaustive laws into data privacy. India is already working on it since a couple of years. And when I was studying at NLSIU, one thing I realized is, as users in India, we are very sensitive to what products we enroll into. Let's say a huge reliance on banking, not the reliance, but some inclination to the banking ecosystem, versus that's why you don't see a lot of neobanks still in India. Whereas when you see countries like UK, you see a lot of neobanks coming in. And that's where you need to be able to categorize that if you are operating into an ecosystem, what areas you want to invest into. Invest a lot into learning technology, learning design, learning business, learning accounting, but also identify if you are, let's say, product manager for UPI. Can you really build a product at that scale without knowing the public policy impact, the behavioral impact you would bring onto the customers? And that's a huge number of customers who would be impacted with your product. So think in that direction based on what your eventual goal is. If you want to work on in public sector companies, if you want to work into policy companies, what additional skills probably you need to cover. And that's where your ethical definitions would also really evolve and mature. Robust tech stack, of course, you would want microservices which can exist. And again, microservices is also a debatable topic. So I'm just sharing that, in my opinion, it works better. But when you would work with your architects, they would be able to really work together. That is it best for the company you are operating into, how your APIs are lightweight, and how your system is able to do future upgrades. Because you don't want to build something which is going to cater to the need of next 1 year. But what happens when in next 3 years your company becomes from 10 million users to 100 million users? You don't want to be in a state where you keep rewriting your stacks because you did not think about it enough. And companies you have worked with, you probably would have already noticed that the rewriting becomes such a hefty exercise, and a lot of companies go through multiple times because what they were trying to solve was the immediate need and often not the future need. So as a PM, you should really focus on it. And of course, a lot of skills which you focus on the skills level you should know, but I would say a lot more on the behavioral side. That are you a servant leader? Because in this role, you really cannot succeed just by being yourself. You need people to partner. You need to know how to really bring that cross-functional alignment, because you would need compliance approvals, you would need legal approvals, you would need so many other things to come into ecosystem, and really define that iterative development model. That this much today, okay, this is what I'm going to build, but tomorrow I will find out more details, and that might impact my decision. And be open to make those changes, because honestly, feature development is agile, but platform has to be even more agile, knowing that every decision you make in the initial part of the process is going to impact you for a long term. And inculcating those values of knowing what is your future vision, knowing what is the 20%, and we'll touch base on it a bit later too, which actually is going to drive 80% of the value in that sense. Because as a company, as a product manager, you would build so many product line fitment exercises, that is the product even a fit for market, and you would deprecate a lot of things. So that's why as a PM, you really need to know when to platformize something. Not everything needs to be platformized just because it's the buzzword, but knowing this is the scale we wanted to validate, and now it's a continuous investment the company wants, and these are the pieces which have commonalities, is something you need to learn into that. And that's how we jump into the RNRs. And each of these topic is probably a massive one and a separate discussion in itself, but we are just going to touch on the surface of it, like I said in the beginning. So keep making notes of the things which are coming to your mind. Whatever resources I have available, I'll probably send it to you guys even after the session. But each of these 6 points we will discuss, you should invest more time on them separately too later. And that's where the first part comes, that how are you really able to envision the big picture? And I know we talk about the big picture and thinking out of the box and all these jargon so many times, but I think the only part I would highlight in this is you as a product manager, knowing that there is a problem statement, I want to validate and find the product market fit. And once I find the product market fit, I am going to scale it and build it right. So it's fine to be scrappy when you are really just validating hundreds of ideas and you want to do product market fit. And then once you have validated any of the KPIs which were important, let's say you were building a feature for acquiring new users, you were building a new growth loop, you might be building something for retention of users, and whatever KPI you really have in mind for that product market fit of that product, if it is meeting, then only your thoughts should start on investing into the tech stack and making it a platform. But your end goal should be very clear. So when you are even testing a scrappy feature, try to have a view on what you really want to extract out of it 2 years from now, 3 years from now. And is it something which is going to even be relevant? Because when we think about relevancy, don't think that Facebook has a like button. The like button has remained for more than a decade now, but it does not mean that the like remained just like button. They were able to evolve like into multiple of the emotions when things need, like for example, for COVID, they ended up launching one more way. You can like in some senses, but you can show your reaction in a different way. So think of it like this, that the feature might be something you would want to invest in a long term, but the flavors might change. And when you have an underlying platform, what it enables is how the presentment or experience for the customer is really built is agnostic to how you built it as a technology. And that's where the point I was mentioning to you about commonalities come into picture, that be open to that testing and learning exercise, but simultaneously keep finding those commonalities. Because you as a platform PM, you are going to be horizontal most of the times, and there would be multiple feature product managers you would be working on with. There would be PMs who manage, let's say, homepage or storefront of the app you're working with or website you're working with. There would be PMs who manage search. There would be PMs who manage settings. There would be PMs who manage another specific product line. And you being able to work together with them and identifying, okay, in your product, these are the common things. And that we foresee that in the company charter, even 4 more products in the future would use. And that is the commonality you want to build. That is the 20% you want to invest a lot to abstract that complexity out and make it simpler. Then solving for the parts which are specific to that feature on its own, because a lot of those things would change, and that is where you need to be very cautious when you over invest into a feature and not complicate something beyond the need is. Now, I said knowing customer is a great deal, but then customer feedback for you would come from so many different senses. Because you are a horizontal organization or horizontal product manager, your customers are not just the end customer. So for example, if you are a B2C app, you cannot always rely on only the feedback that is coming from the customer. You should totally look into it. You should be aware of how the measurement is happening, how KPIs are being mattered, what metrics company is focusing on. But then you should also be aware consciously on what are the other stakeholders that really impact your decision. Like I said before, it can be developers, it can be your feature PM partners, And don't assume anything. Just like we say for a feature PM, that don't assume what your customer wants. As a platform PM or platform engineer, don't assume that you know what a developer wants just because you are a developer. It just does not answer anything, because what you as a developer have experienced probably are going to be very different for a customer, who is also a developer, because their goals can be totally different than you. Your fundamental principle should always be to solve what that developer would need. What can you do in order to really help them move faster? And that is eventually the ultimate goal of your partner company would be. How mature your product is, how confident you can really make them feel, and how less they have to invest before they continue on your product for long term. And hence the need for thinking platformization at the right time. Don't jump onto saying that we need to invest into building this stack because some deadline is approaching. Like I said, you should be able to test and learn and find the product market fit without over investing into it and without over complicating the problem. So abstract that complexity out, build some pieces, have the right mindset, but probably wait till product market fit when you really define and find the commonalities, and then you move to the platformization effort. So in this exercise, probably, even if you are not going to build something, you should continuously invest time with your feature PMs on things they are doing, so that they are focused onto finding their product market fit, because they are going to be busy into that exercise. But you should be an observer who is looking at their offering, finding that complexity, what can really be solved, which can enable them for future. And that is where one of the part of instant gratification comes into picture. And I specifically call out that platforms are not the shiny kids. Platforms are not and should not be the blue-eyed kids in the meeting room where you can clap on it for every week. And if you are a platform PM, you probably already are into that feeling where you should not or cannot be someone who can be mentioned that, oh, I delivered something this week. So don't even fall into trap of it. If your goal is instant gratification, if that's the model that really works for you, uh, platform PM might not be something you would enjoy a lot, because in this probably your returns would come not even in matter of months. It might be 6 months, 12 months, or even more. So quick redemption, instant gratification, don't make that as a goal if you are a platform PM, and don't expect that you would be able to evolve the monetization, the loyalty of the customers immediately, because that would need the product to mature. That would need you to really understand those needs better. And it is going to take time. Hence the point that find the product market fit and then invest on it, not vice versa. Because otherwise you would miss the train. Market is changing so fast, and product market fit has to happen at an early stage of the overall product development cycle. So again, repeating what I showed you in the graph in the beginning, that there are going to be multiple pieces, whether it's a search API, whether it's a catalog API or anything else. You need to learn that art together, because you might be building one of the pieces, but there would be other platform PMs too who are building the other pieces. And you being aware how to integrate and consume those together. So let's say you build a piece, it's a very important piece, but then it cannot work with the other piece, your fellow product manager of another platform piece really created. And they are not able to talk to each other. The data sharing is not working. That you would be trapped in a situation in your own company where what you build is not going to useful, leave apart even for external developers. So be aware of the other elements, and that's why the role of your developers, your architects come into picture. That how you are able to bring an architect with you who is horizontally aware of a lot of things happening. And again, if you are at a mid-scale to a fast-growing startup, you might not have that level of complexity, that there are so many systems where someone has to know a lot of horizontal details. In that case, you probably need someone who understands the industry, who understands how to really build things at scale. But if you are a product manager in a large company, what would really play a role for you is how much horizontal do you really know. If you are, let's say, building a search capability, do you know from where the data is going to come, what databases they really use? Can you have copies of those data points or not, because there might be legal restrictions. So knowing that horizontal data, sometimes you might be able to know, sometimes you really need to find the right architects who can help you navigate through this. But in any of the process, none of you, whether you or your architect, would be able to have that instant gratification and be very, very conscious about that. And last, which I touched on in this point, is about the monetization and pricing model. Though you cannot monetize immediately, but that doesn't mean you should not be thinking about it. You should be clear on the product you are building. What is the value proposition that company, that developer, that internal team is getting from you, and how you can monetize. So let's say if you're building something for internal teams, you would probably not be charging them, or if it's multiple companies under a umbrella company, you might still charge them, but that is still paperwork. What you need to do is have some utility to that internal team or an external customer. So you can have various ways to really charge them, and that's what you see in the ecosystem. When you use an open banking integration, or let's say a payment processor, they would have multiple ways they can charge you. It can be based on the volume you process, and they might give you lower rates, versus you don't expect a lot of volume, they might charge you per transaction on a percentage basis, they might charge you on a commission basis. Some websites, let's say marketplace creation websites, might charge you commission for every sale that happen. Uh, you can monetize your data for advertisements, which is where I think the role of the product ethics also comes into picture, that how and what data you should monetize on, and versus what data you should not even store. So being aware of those complexities would help you define what are the right pricing models for you to work on. And pricing can be a topic in itself. It's a huge topic based on so many factors, including the market you operate into, the competitiveness of your product, and should you be offering a freemium product first, uh, versus giving a trial to people. Irrespective of the level of product development you are at, have a view on how you envision the pricing and monetization to work out. And that can evolve based on your product roadmap, if it gets impacted, how the market has really changed during the months or weeks you were really investing onto that. But as a product manager, accounting is another area which I would say is not something we end up investing a lot in, but pricing is a core essence of being a product manager. So learn a bit about accounting, learn a bit about how pricing works, and how companies decide to charge you on product. Like there are a lot of reasons why Netflix charges you $14.99 and not $20, or why Google, when they launch YouTube TV, they have just increased the price, why they really ended up increasing the price. So a lot of those changes dictate how much the price should increase, and are users really going to drop the subscription because you increase the price or not, or you communicate enough value that they would still continue with you. All those would help you be better into your future goals in that sense. And I would just close this topic with something you have heard a lot of times about on 80/20 rule, how it works. That even in platform roadmap, when you're defining, the core essence is knowing what are the most important things, that 20% that really drives the 80% value. And that is where the steps we discussed about find the commonality, work with your feature PM, work with other uh, platform PMs comes into picture, so that you are able to identify that 20% better, and not invest into the efforts which are independent, which are siloed, which are one-time need or ad hoc requests. And closing with the point which we touched on, the platform principles, about how do you remove your biases and put your ethics into the foundation of platform building. So when you start defining your features, your platform blocks, have a conscious eye on things of data security, data privacy, user security, accessibility. It probably is going to be a smaller customer segment a lot of times when you talk about making things inclusive, making things accessible. But it's an important element. You don't want to do a mistake because you think people who are not able to see are not the audience of your app. But that would mean that you just monetize for one KPI of, because 99% of my users are being catered, and you are not catering to and creating a discriminatory product in some senses. So in your thinking, be inclusive, be conscious of what your users want. And sometimes they might not know what they want, like security and privacy. You can't expect user to really know what impact their data can have on themselves at a later point of time, and which you see so often into a lot of companies when they monetize the data for advertisement. And we have had elections upturned because of that. And I'm not saying that, whether it was right or wrong, but then someone has to make a decision, and they also made a decision, whether it's Facebook, whether it's other companies, that what mistake really happened in how the data was consumed, how the access to that data was managed. And you don't want to be in a space or uncharted territory where you cause more harm than the good your platform would really bring into. Very philosophical, but I would say a very important topic you would want to eventually invest on. Few books, like I mentioned, there are no really cheat codes to be a good product manager, but read all the books which help you learn customer psychology, the behavioral economics better. And some of these books, like Design of Everyday Things, really talks about a lot of everyday things we use and how they have been thought through, how startups are built, or how addiction versus products people feel hooked to are built. So I'll send this list across, but I think the only recommendation I would have is to mature your skill, whether a feature PM or platform PM. What you need to learn is how people think, have that empathy when you are really building those products. And I think that fundamental is the core essence of the role. I would not incline to the skills of design or engineering as the core principles, but your focus should be on some of these behavioral traits. Awesome. I think I took 10 more minutes, but yes, if you're already bored, I think Papi already cheers people up. So yeah, thank you for taking our time. And yes, we can jump into.
So, Saurabh, this is very relevant. I think the points that you have touched make total sense for anybody who's looking to build products. And irrespective of whatever kind of products we're building, there is always scope of looking at them through platforms, through building consumer platforms or building tech platforms or building marketplace platforms. And as you keep building it, it gets more and more important. So thank you for double diving into all those things. So let's have questions. Shruti, you have a couple of questions you want to ask?
Yeah, I think he answered the first one. Hi, Saurabh. So I am guessing that there won't be any basic tech topics that you would want to share right now. So I'll just dive on to the second one. There are a lot of platform details which are handled by third-party tech giants, AWS, Google, Microsoft Azure, and the likes. And how much do you think a product manager of a medium-sized company or a small-scale, just starting up company should focus on customer experience, or should just offload all of those platform details onto bigger giants who know what they are doing, who give us pay-as-you-go service, who also know integration. But I personally don't see a drawback of taking their help, but of course it's a cost center for me. So what do you think? Is that favorable, or we should always look at creating tech from scratch in your own house, so that even if scaling is a little bit slow, it's still your own data?
Yeah, no, and very valid point. I think this is an important decision and especially when you are starting a company or scaling a company, you would always take, because you need to really know the core of your product offering. There is something you would be or your team would be good at, and there would be some things that are not worthy of your investments. Because, so take example of what Shruti has given on, let's say, cloud service providers. 10 years back, 15 years back, there were companies who were setting up their own server farms, buying their own physical servers, setting them up. And it's a costly exercise. It takes time to mature it to a level where you can scale and, define the costing per cluster. Versus companies like specifically AWS, because they have been market leaders for a long time, they have been able to understand that unit dynamics very good. So when you are a startup, you might need, let's say, 2 clusters. And sometimes envisioning that how many clusters you would need tomorrow might be also harder and a very tedious exercise to set up. So I personally, I agree, yes. And that's why those companies are successful, because they really abstracted out those complexities for you as a startup or even a global company. Like, I think Netflix works on AWS, right? And Netflix is
Yeah.
a huge company, but what they have really transferred to Amazon, that Netflix has built a service where they ensure you get good content. They ensure you are shown the best content based on your user preferences. But the ability to upload and distribute that content is on AWS. Now, whether AWS puts that content closer to an Indian user into Singapore versus to a US user in Texas, that is up to them, and they would know how to manage it better. So Netflix already moved away from that problem and started solving it. Versus companies like Facebook, they started with other cloud providers, but at a point of time, they realized that they are big enough, they are good enough that they can work
Mhm.
on some of their own solutions, and they might do it. But yes, I agree, in most scenarios, you need to know what problems you cannot solve, and there are market leaders. And even in unit dynamics, in the costing structure, it would work better for you. So it can be about cloud providers, it can be about customer support CRM tools,
Mhm.
it can be about chatbots, and not every of these problems should be really solved if this is not core of your product, I would say. So yeah, very valid point.
Okay. Thank you.
Sahana, you want to ask your question? Sahana, the question is that our platform products built with the mindset of making product as a service.
Yeah, I think we touched base on this one when we were discussing, but yes, I'll reiterate one of the points in that which I mentioned, that yes, you should definitely look for it. And when you think about as a service, I mean, not everything has to be a service, but even if your clients for that service are internal, you should still be able to envision that. Uh, the example we took was of search, that the search, you might want to just allow multiple teams in your company to use it, versus something you can offer to third party companies where they don't need to build the search capabilities and you just give it on the fly. So yes, I think defining that, if the platform is for internal consumption, and if you're a B2C company, you don't have plans to externalize those APIs, externalize those services, then probably don't think of as a service as a external extension, because then the KPIs become very different. But even if it's internal, it's great to have some things as a service which multiple teams really want.
Okay, makes sense. Ismail, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to check what are some of the technical areas that a non-developer aspiring platform PM could pick up so that he can relate to the challenges much easier compared to a typical B2C or a B2B SaaS PM.
Yeah, no, valid point, and I thank you for highlighting it. I missed touching on that when Shruti mentioned regarding that. I would say some of the fundamental things, like there are some abstraction of coder versus non-coder, which are actually subliming now. So that is one of the reasons that you see coding being taught in schools, because it is not just a computer science skill, but it is actually getting simplified a lot. Like if you code into C versus Python, you know that how the new age languages have basically been able to abstract out a lot of complexity, and that has actually made it easier for non-technical people to learn the technical logical part of it. So when I say logical part of it, think of a coder writing code, but a product manager still being able to define that flow chart, the sequence of execution, and the logical interpretation of that decision making. So I would say as a platform PM, you should definitely know about various tech stacks. So let's say if you are into data management, you should know how Kafka works versus how other of its competitors work. If you are working with your front end teams, you should know the front end technologies, how React was versus if you're building front end, how GraphQL would work and make your experiences lighter. You should be able to understand how API constructs work. You don't need to be someone who can build APIs, but basic things like, can you do a SQL query? Can you check some request and response on Postman? and review a postman collection your developer shared. And these are, I would say, non-technical skills in a lot of senses, because most of the interpretation of all the things I'm mentioning are very close to English. So even if you are let's say a business graduate or a liberal arts graduate, it should not be a lot of effort for you to really grab those topics. But I would say if you are a platform PM, you should totally invest a lot of time understanding how the developers think, understanding that construct better, so that you are able to communicate much better. Because your customer is also a developer in a lot of scenarios. You don't want to be the person who does not even know what your customer is talking about.
Thanks a lot, Saurabh. This has been a very enriching and very insightful session. And I request everybody to unmute and give a big round of applause to Saurabh. That's the max that we can do in these remote sessions.
Thank you.
So yeah, thanks everyone. Thank you, Saurabh, for taking out time to do this.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Take care. Good night.